Hey everybody, welcome back to the channel. If you want to know what the absolute best, easiest, strongest weld-on high steer arms are for your Super Duty 1-ton swap, guys, you're going to want to check this one out. Now I know what you're thinking. We've all been on social media.
Don't be jealous that I've been chatting online with babes all day.
We've all seen the people that just get their brand new tires on their Jeep, drive them home, and then do a tire review.
You've got a sweet ride there.
Don't touch it.
You have 8 miles on your tires.
Go on, get out. You heard me.
Honestly though, guys, I am 100% comfortable in saying that these weld-on high steer arms from Artec Industries are the best. And that's simply because I built enough of these axles at this point, used a number of different companies at this point, and this one is by far the best engineered kit that I have ever come across. These from Artec are unstoppable, and we're gonna get to it, and I'm going to explain why. The first thing that we're going to have to talk about is the knuckle itself. And the 05 and up model, it's actually a super strong knuckle from the factory. And simply relocating your steering and moving it up is going to get that tie rod up out of the way or set you up for full hydro and be super, super strong. But the real thing that sets this high steer kit apart from others is the lack of work that it takes to actually get it installed, while still sacrificing none of the strength, if anything being stronger than the others. Now, every single one of these kits that I've ever installed require you to grind down and clean your knuckle. They're also going to require you to grind this nub that's on the front of every single one of these Super Duty steering knuckles. We have to get rid of that. It's just a casting mark, and it's going to prevent us from getting a nice weld and getting in there with our steering. And one of the other things that every single one of these kits actually forces you to do is drill out the factory mount for your factory tie rod. Now, the cool thing about the Artec kit is one knuckle requires you to drill it out, but only to a 3/4 inch hole, which is a lot less difficult than a lot of the others, which gives you less opportunity to mess it up and actually drill the hole crooked. I'll explain more about that later because I actually did it on war paint, and I'll show you how I messed it up.
Yeah, that looks pretty good if you stand back and squint.
So with a flap disc and a grinding wheel, we clean up the front, get rid of that casting mark. All right, guys, you know what it looked like before? Clearly that spot now is ground down. Now, I also like anywhere I'm welding to actually grind it down and get rid of this porous type material here from the casting. Try to get through that as much as possible, giving myself a nice smooth surface to actually weld to, making sure I don't contaminate anything. But there's one more thing we have to do before we can start putting this thing together. Now, if you're like me and your Super Duty 60 is from 2005 to 2010, there's not much difference between it, but the knuckles are actually a little bit different starting in 2011. The 2005 to 2010 Super Duty require you to trim a piece off of this, and Artec took care of it by etching a line on it, letting you know where to cut. This is basically gonna kind of fit on right up here like this, curved toward the inside, and you can see how the casting here and this, it doesn't really quite fit on there right. If you flip it over and look on the inside, you can see these etched lines. There's one here, and there's one in the top. You're actually just gonna come in here with your grinder and just cut this off. The 2011s, you would keep that. So you really have to know what model year your axle is, and you can find that by finding the BOM number on your axle using the internet. So with those tabs cut off, it's time to start putting this thing together. But first, I just want to bring you over and show you the other guy's kit on war paint. Now, this isn't an opportunity to sit there and knock anybody else's steering, because lots of companies out there make good steering. This is one of them on war paint. I haven't broken it. It's been fine. But the kit from Artec is simple, and this is one of the places that they save you the opportunity from screwing it up like I did on war paint. On war paint, if you come down here, hopefully you guys can see it. When I drilled this big 1-inch bolt through the knuckle, because the knuckle down here was tapered, I actually sent the drill bit through on a little bit of an angle, and that piece is not actually straight. the angle, the dangle there. This Artec's kit actually has a smaller bolt.
That's what she said.
And you wouldn't think smaller would be beneficial, but here's why it is. This smaller 3/4 inch bolt, we have it next to the larger one just for size comparison, is obviously not as strong. For example, a 3/4 inch grade 8 bolt has a shear strength of 87,000 pounds per square inch, while the 1-inch bolt has a shear strength of 117,000 pounds per square inch, so clearly stronger. When you take the provided DOM tube that Artec gives you in this kit and then slide that grade 8 bolt inside of it, the overall diameter of this is actually bigger than that bolt. Now, DOM tube isn't measured with a shear strength. It's measured in tensile strength and a couple of other things, but it's also super high. And because we were kind of close to the shear strength of that 1-inch bolt with the 3/4, then you're sleeving it with a piece of DOM tube that's not only welded to the knuckle, but also to your high steer arm. I don't think there's any doubt which one's ultimately gonna be stronger. This piece of DOM tube that I showed the bolt go through just a minute ago, you'll notice this end is actually machined for you directly from Artec, and it meets the taper that's inside of the knuckle. So this piece just slides down in there. It'll get welded later. Then we have another piece which actually goes in the bottom. Now this has a slight taper as well and effectively eliminates the factory taper that's in there, lines everything up. Then we take that grade 8 bolt, slide it through, and put our nut on the bottom. This guy just slides right on. Gives us a nice place to put a good weld in there, as well as down the side. This piece of DOM also gives us enough room at the top to lay a weld all the way around there as well. So this guy, this notch is essentially gonna fit around our DOM, and then this bolt hole here lines up with the top one so that we can actually fit everything together. But you'll notice it's notched out here. This piece is a major difference in the Artec kit versus the other guys that are out there on the market, because this winds up becoming a gusset down the inside of the knuckle. It attaches to the top, down the inside, as well as to that bottom plate. The curve here facing forward, we're gonna key it together, basically fit this guy in there. There are some ways that we're gonna weld this that are a little bit different than welding, let's say, your truss to your axle tubes, because the knuckle, if you remember, is made out of cast steel. So we actually have to sit there and preheat it a little bit. It's just a very simple step. It's not a big deal. No special MIG wire. We're gonna get it done. Be sure to tack everything in place all the way around, making sure nothing shifts or moves as you do your finished welding. Also make sure you use a spacer so you don't affect the spacing where your joint is gonna go. Now you're gonna use a MAP gas or propane torch to heat an area of the knuckle up to about 350, 400 degrees before you weld it. Then monitor the temperature as it cools back down, making sure the mild steel, weld, and cast all cool within 50 degrees of each other until it's about 150 degrees. Then at that point, you can let nature cool it down the way it normally would. With all the cast steel welded, now it's time to weld the mild steel. Basically welded everywhere, even took advantage and welded that little vacuum port shut. I'll put a couple of stitch welds inside once it cools a little bit. I can ensure that this distance doesn't warp. So guys, with the passenger side all welded up and finished at this point, it's time to move on to the driver's side. Now that one is a little bit different. Here's how it goes. Once again, the driver's side has that nub, that casting mark that actually has to be ground down just like the other side. If you guys remember, I said that all the other guys' high steer arms require you to drill out the knuckle, and this one on the passenger side didn't, but the driver's side does. You're gonna have to drill this out to a 3/4 inch hole. Takes the same bolt that the other side took, but the hole on this side, the tapered hole even, is quite a bit smaller and it won't just fit, so we have to drill it out. Now I do that by stepping it up over 3 different drill bits. I start off with a 5/8, then once the hole is drilled, move to an 11/16, then finally to a 3/4. Now, very similar to the passenger side, we have our bottom plate, we have our top plate, we have our tube, our bolt, our nut, and our fitting. This is still gonna go on top, but there's one key difference. This one has a slight tapered edge on this side, which actually goes on the top by the bolt head. The bottom is actually just flat. It doesn't fit inside there. This is gonna basically sit flat on top. We're gonna throw our bolt through it. Keep in mind that tapered edge is closer to the top for the head of that 3/4 inch bolt. Our fitting is gonna go on the bottom and it'll fit up in there nice and flush. Then we're gonna put our nut on the bottom and tighten it down and then assemble the rest, just like we did on the passenger side. Now, I took our piece of tube that I cut, making sure our spacing was correct, and I assembled it, right? Bolted it together, kind of hold that bottom plate in there. Then you simply just line up that sleeve, drop it on, basically until it stops and sits there. And then our gusset, same as the other side, basically just slides into place, comes up, fits together. We tack weld everything into position so nothing moves. Guys, at that point, you heat the cast, you weld it, just like I did on the other side. You take your time, let it cool, finish weld it. Once it's completely cool, then you can remove your nuts and bolts. That way things as they cool don't warp out of shape, and paint it up. But these arms are absolutely the ones that you're gonna want for your 1-ton swap if you want the right steering geometry and you want weld-on arms that are gonna work really well. Just make sure your welder settings are right, make sure everything's nice and clean, take your time, follow the steps, it'll go together perfectly, just like everything else that Artec makes. Anyway, guys, make sure you get out there, you build something.